It's always fun to watch these presidential candidates who don't seem to understand, despite as much as RFK Jr. and others understand about this system. It is amazing to see them slowly come to the realization of exactly how it's rigged. Like, I've known this stuff for years now. I'd say the moment I really 100% figured out just how rigged it was the first Bernie Sanders run, 2016. I knew it was pretty rigged, but I didn't know it was 100% until you saw Bernie Sanders get the primary stolen from him in about 12 different ways. But he then continued to run in 2020 as if he didn't understand how the system worked. And I was like, dude, how do you not get this yet? And so we watched that happen. And then, you had others. Tulsi Gabbard tried to run in the Democratic primary. You had Marianne Williamson, who's doing it again, who apparently doesn't understand how this system is rigged. And now you have RFK Jr. also. But he's starting to get it. Things are starting to click with him as to just how rigged this system is.
It's pretty clear that the DNC does not want a primary. I don't want to say that they want a coronation, but that's, I think that's a fair way to put it, actually.
I'm going to keep playing him, but yeah, of course, dude. Like, I don't understand why you can't say this from day one. You know how this, doesn't he know how this system? I don't know. Did he really think the DNC was just going to let him actually run legitimately? And for those of you who regularly watch me, you know that I have things I very much disagree with RFK Jr. on. I have stuff that I have congratulated on him on bringing up and making it a topic in this political sphere that it rarely gets talked about, such as Big Ag and his attacks against many corporate entities. But I also have things I very much disagree with him on. But this is something that's like, did you really think they were going to let you? Anyway, I'll get into some more of the details as we go.
They're essentially fixing the process so that it makes it almost impossible to have democracy function. They're effectively disenfranchising the Democratic voters from having any choice in who becomes president, or who becomes the Democratic nominee.
So all of that had been done, and had very clearly been done, in at least 2016 and 2020. I've talked about it many times. Obviously, when I had Redacted Tonight, the show, I did weekly during 2016. Every week, we'd bring new segments as to how it was being rigged, as to how the machines were rigged, as to how it was incredibly different from the exit polling. And the exit polling was always way off in Bernie Sanders' favor, meaning people walking out of the place were clearly saying they were voting for Bernie Sanders, and people in the voting machines were voting for Hillary. And and they calculate for things like people might be less proud of Hillary than they are of Bernie Sanders. If you poll enough people and you know what you're doing, you can eliminate that kind of manipulation, because people are more proud to say I voted for Bernie. Anyway, but the exit polls were always way off. Sometimes just a few percentage points, sometimes as many as 12 percentage points, which is unheard of. So I was covering all of that, and it wasn't, sometimes it was the machines that were rigged, which were shown in the audit. Sometimes it was convincing everybody to fill out provisional ballots if they were Bernie voters, which provisional ballots are basically placebo ballots. They essentially count for nothing. It was only having certain polling places open, like in New Mexico, where people were in Bernie areas had to all wait in line for like 3-4 hours to try and vote, because they eliminated the number of polling places. All of these things are done in order to barely help Hillary scrape by. Then all of that shit and more is done to barely help Biden scrape by. And in court, We saw the DNC lawyers admit that the DNC has no obligation to a fair primary. They legally, the DNC can go into this is a quote from the lawyers, a smoke-filled room and pick their nominee. They do not have to have a fair primary. And so the DNC has no obligation and doesn't care to have a fair primary. They care to coronate whoever it is they put in there. And this has been known for years. So when RFK started running, this is before Cornell announced and any of it, and I said, even as he started running, that if he were to prove formidable enough that he was going to win the nomination, even after super delegates and all that shit, if he was proven formidable enough, the DNC would have used the nuclear option, which they put into the bylaws a few years ago, saying that they can decide a candidate is not democratic enough, doesn't fit with our policies enough. And that's what they would have done. They would have said, RFK Jr. doesn't fit with the policies of the DNC enough and therefore is not the nominee. They would never in a million years have let him be the nominee. And he is right now, this is a new video, starting to realize
it. So two of the things they've done to date is they've moved the Iowa primary. They've made rules that if anybody campaigns in Iowa or any candidate sets foot in the state of Iowa or sets foot in the state of New Hampshire, then none of the votes that are cast for that candidate will be tallied. And
now I tried to look it up. I didn't have time to do a lot of research. I couldn't find what he's talking about. I take him at his word. Which of course, yeah, that'd be another way to rig it. If you stop all campaigning in these states, Iowa, New Hampshire, whatever, then who's going to win? Well, generally it's going to be the person that is best known because no one's been campaigning in their state. So it's going to be Joe Biden. Yes, Joe Biden is a weak candidate, but if no one's campaigning, he's still going to win. I hadn't heard of that rule, but it wouldn't surprise me.
In other words, any delegate that I win in New Hampshire or Iowa would go instead to the president. And now they're trying to change it so that if I campaign in New Hampshire, that none of the votes cast for me in Georgia will count. And that's significant because it's hard to win the nomination without Georgia.
What is the law?
I don't understand why that would be. I don't understand why if you campaign in New Hampshire, votes in Georgia wouldn't count, but I wouldn't put it past the DNC. I mean, if we can find articles on this, then it wouldn't surprise me, but DNC will do anything to rig these things. And you'll remember the last time around in Iowa, because that was the first contest, although they've moved some of the dates. I don't know if Iowa might still be first, but I don't know if it is, but I think didn't they get rid of the caucuses, or they got rid of the caucuses in most states? And they tried to claim it's because the caucuses are messy, but that's not the real reason. The real reason is you go into a caucus, you're more likely the actual left-wing candidate like Bernie Sanders is going to win because the people debating in a caucus, like you go in with your fellow town members and you argue. And when you're arguing, it's easier to argue for someone who actually stands by their beliefs. In 2016, since then, Bernie has run around the country shilling for Hillary Clinton and shit like that. So at the time he had stood by his beliefs, but it's easier to argue for someone who is, an actual somewhat left-wing candidate than it is to argue that the same bullshit right-wing liberal is a good idea. I mean, arguing for Joe Biden when you walk into these caucuses would be very difficult. So caucuses tend to lean left. Now, Bernie Sanders would have won Iowa in the last time around, 2020, except that Pete Buttigieg, who was connected to the creation of this, had people create the shadow app where every caucus reported their numbers on an app that completely malfunctioned so that no one could declare winning Iowa. And then Buttigieg walked out and said he won Iowa. And it was really all by design. I don't know if they meant to rig it effectively or they meant for it to just be chaos. But either way, they succeeded by creating this ridiculous thing, literally called the shadow app, that just basically took every caucus vote number and just fucking threw it up in the air so no one knew what was what. Anyway.
Logic.
Well, they're rigging it so that it, effectively, we're looking at it.
By the way, can I just throw in here, why does RFK need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 crosses behind him? Like, I'm gonna take a wild guess that he's Christian. Like, how many crosses do you need behind you in your interviews? And this is where he normally does his interviews, is the fucking Jesus on the cross central here. I feel like, I'm not saying he can't be Christian. I just like, I feel like one probably would have done the trick. How many you need?
The tabulations now that look like if you add up all the super delegates that they control and all of the automatic delegates that just go to the party and go to the president, I would have to win almost 80% of all of the states in order to beat President Biden.
So I kind of find it baffling that RFK just now understands the math of the stupidity of super delegates and everything else. The states that are whatever polling crazy for Biden, so they're kind of not even in competition. All that kind of math. And RFK has just realized that that's how the math works, is like ridiculously rigged for the people already in power. I feel like on day one, he should have been like, this math is rigged. And instead, he apparently just did the calculations today, I guess.
Even if he only wins 20%.
And yet you continue on. So what is your strategy then in light of this for defeating President Biden?
These rules will.
I love how the lady who works for Forbes doesn't say, well, that's horrible, it's rigged. Like, that should be her response. Instead, her response is, and why are you staying in the race then? It sounds like he's gonna win, so you should just drop out. Why are you not dropping out? Like, shouldn't your response be, fuck that, I had no idea it was so rigged? Like, that's how she should respond, but she works for Forbes, so.
Will not be finalized until September 14th, and we've written the DNC protesting. I mean, there's some really wild things that they're now considering, including forcing me to actually pay for the primaries. And their logic is that they don't need a primary because they already have a candidate. And therefore, I'm costing them all this money, and that money should be paid for by me and, maybe Marianne Williamson.
I mean, how corrupt can the DNC get that it's trying to make the people that want to hold it accountable as an actual somewhat democratic entity? It's trying to make them pay the millions and millions of dollars it costs to have a primary. Like, how disgusting can the DNC get? I mean, none of it. It's like there's no level of fucking awfulness from the DNC where it shocks me. It's just, you're just like, yeah, there they are. Wow, they are super corrupt. They might as well just have a blinking corrupt sign on the front door. But again, I think that RFK Jr., this is why you don't run in the Democratic primary. Like, I think RFK Jr. probably should have known this, and at minimum been talking about it from day one, as should Bernie Sanders, especially in 2020, after he'd already seen it all punched in his face. I mean, really, he spent 2016 with them just punching him brutally in the face and the crotch just endlessly. And then he walks into 2020 as if it never happened. I bet this will work. And then, and then he's like, oh, they're punching me again. I didn't see this coming.
So it's not, it's a process that is rigged. And we live at a time in American history when a lot of Americans think that democracy is broken, that the system, the political system is rigged, and that there's not really any democracy. And unfortunately, the DNC is taking a lot of steps that confirm that outlook.
If the decision holds for the current, sort of primary structure with the DNC, what is the route to victory for you against President Biden?
Oh, if the DNC is going to rig it so that it is simply impossible for anybody to challenge President Biden, then I need to look at other alternatives.
But I love that, again, the Forbes woman was like, so let's just say it stays completely corrupt. How are you going to win then? Like, her response should be, this is awful. Why are they so anti-democratic? And instead, she's just like, then why do you keep persisting? Why haven't you dropped out yet? All right, so I wanted to show you that. I take no joy in saying this, but that RFK is beginning to realize how the DNC works. Despite everything we saw, despite all of the rigging that I detailed week to week to week throughout 2016 and 2020, RFK is just being confronted with some of this knowledge, apparently.